Welcome back to part 2 of our delicious conversation with Yuriy Boyecheko. He is the founder and president of Hope for Ukraine, Inc. Yuriy is a graduate of Regent University. With an MA in media communications, he dedicated his life to media and then turned his focus to humanitarian efforts in 2016, around just after what happened with Crimea. Now, you may not be familiar with that, but that was in many ways the preliminary warm-up for what's happened with the Ukraine war and what we're seeing now. In part 1 of the show, we were talking about what's really going on in Ukraine right now, what's driving Putin, what it's like to be in the Ukraine, and moreover, what are the implications for the rest of the world, not only for America, but for the rest of the world, if the humanitarian aid stops. So we were talking about this a lot in part 1. We're going to jump in further here because obviously the Ukrainian people do not want to be at war. That's obvious. I don't know that anybody really wants to be at war who's sane. So at the same time, the invading army is Putin's army. Putin is not known for being apologetic about anything. He's a little bit egomaniacal, let's just say a little bit for now. And as a result, he's not likely to admit defeat in anything. So obviously this war has had enormous impact on Russia, who figured the war was going to be over in 3 weeks. It's not. It's 3 years. It's economically damaged the country enormously. The inflation is through the roof. They've got all kinds of problems. They've lost enormous amounts of soldiers. They're bringing in soldiers from North Korea. They're still getting hit hard. The Ukrainian resilience at a fight for their country level has been crazy good. Understanding all those factors and the fact that Putin is not likely to back down on anything, how are the Ukrainian people feeling about the possibility of peace?
So, first of all, right now, everybody wants peace in Ukraine. Everybody's exhausted and tired. And as far as territory goes, they're ready to give up the territory that's controlled by Russia right now for the sake of peace. So they want to preserve, even if there's one oblast, but to have freedom and democracy. They don't care at the territory at this point. But on the other hand, we want to make sure, I think the number one point right now is the security guarantees. Okay, if you're going to get peace agreement, what's going to happen with Ukraine after that? Because we've been through this already. In 2014, there was Minsk agreement. They rebuilt the army and they attacked us in 2022. And a lot of people on the ground feared it can happen again if there is no serious security guarantee in place for Ukraine. So I think that's the number one point right now. Like we spoke before, it's either we have alliance of someone who can guarantee the security for Ukraine, or Ukraine will have to rely on their own and get nuclear weapons to protect themselves from destruction. Because if there's no security guarantee, pretty sure you can bet on it that in 3-5 years, Russia will move in again to capture the rest of the territory. As long as Putin's alive, and I want to stress this point, he's not going to stop. If he's not on this earth, then I think it's going to change. But as long as he's alive, he only understands the language of strength. He does not understand dialogue. He does not abide by any agreements that's on paper. The only time he's going to stop if somebody put a fist in his face, then he's going to pull back. So that's where we are as a nation.
If there's a peace treaty and Ukraine gives up Donetsk, which is more Russian, let's say that that peace agreement is signed, because part of that peace agreement from the Russian point of view will probably be, and that America has to keep its nose out. Even if that peace agreement happens, how do you say, well, that Putin's not going to come back in 2 years or in 4 years or whenever it might be?
I think the only way they're not going to come back if Ukraine has a strong army, whether Ukraine is in NATO or there is a security guaranteed, just like Israel has from United States.
Mm-hmm.
If there's some sort of agreement like that. And on the other hand, I think once Russian economy is going to collapse, they're not going to have money to wage the war the way they're waging right now. The reason why they still around is because they can pay for the war. My projection is the Russian economy is not going to do well for next 5 to 10 years if the sanctions is applied correctly.
Right.
And if that's going to happen, I think it's going to be a regime change, number one, in Russia. And I think whoever comes after Putin, they might be as bad as him, but they're going to have so many economic issues internally, they're not going to think about invading other countries for a minute. And if they're going to get rebuilt, then of course they might come back to this. But you're talking about 10 to 20 years.
Yeah.
By then, half of Russia is going to be owned by China anyways.
There is that. There is that. So my heritage is Jewish, and I can remember being a kid. So this is in the 60s, and I can remember being a kid and my grandmother freaking out when the fuse blew because the lights had suddenly gone out, and because it reminded her of the war, the Blitz in England and the German bombers. And I think about that level of PTSD and think about that on the Ukraine people. How the hell can you trust a peace treaty with your neighbor who is, to say the least, unstable and is a bully? When you talk about humanitarian, I think about, yes, of course, food and water and shelter and medical and blah, blah, blah. But the psychological level of impact that this must have had and will continue to have on the Ukrainian people for generations, because there's a lot of kids there.
It's terrible. Listen, you're talking about now, I have a cell phone. If I go in a room full of kids there and I drop it, they all shake and hide under the table because of constant air raids. So this generation is growing with complete emotional distress and disaster. And it's going to be for years to come. So I think right now, Ukraine realizing that we need to depend on ourselves, number one. We cannot rely on US, we cannot rely on Europe, because in the end of the day, if you remember, there was a Budapest agreement where Ukraine was asked to give up the nuclear weapons, and we were told by Russia, US, and Britain, I believe, they will be protecting sovereignty of the Ukraine. But you know what happened to Budapest agreement. So every agreement from now on is going to be looked through that lens of mistrust, because we've been fooled a number of times. So I think as far as Ukraine goes, no matter what's going to be signed on the paper and ceasefire happens, Ukraine will invest heavily into building one of the strongest army there is. And it's going to be a modern army. Just so we understand, on the fields right now, on the battlefields, most of the casualties are done through drones, not artillery and old-fashioned.
Let's just talk about that for a minute, because as I track the war, it's very clear to me that the Russians are using really pretty much Second World War tactics, right? Which is just roll over everybody with a lot of people and use cannon fodder, use the front line to just take the hits and keep plowing through. I think I told you that I had interviewed John Spencer, who wrote the Urban Warfare Handbook for the Ukraine. He came out of West Point and wrote this book and gave it to them and tried to guide them, and that they went into this guerrilla tactics. And part of that was these drones. And in many ways, Ukraine was kind of behind the eight ball and suddenly jumped so far ahead. Talk to us about adopting of drones and guerrilla warfare and how that's had such a powerful impact.
It's all behind the society of Ukrainian people that stood behind the army. Because so you understand, in Ukraine, and I just got this video recently, you can see on our social media. So we've been involved in supplying firewood to these areas where people have no lights and heat for 2+ years. And there is this video of this little boy, 4 years old. He comes and works with his father, who's volunteer, loading up this big truck of firewood. This little boy grabs one log of firewood, he goes to the truck, puts it on a big truck, goes, picks up another one. But that just shows the heart and the spirit of Ukrainian people, where from the age of 4 or 5, these guys want to do something to help those who are on the front line. And the whole drone situation came out of volunteering movement in Ukraine. Just so you understand, like the weapons that West supplied, first of all, the weapons didn't start coming in until like June or July of 2022. And it was a drop in the bucket. It was not enough to fight the army of Russia. So these young guys who played video games, they took a regular FPV drone, they put a grenade to it, and they flew it through the window of the house where Russian soldiers were stationed in Kiev region. That was the first use of domestic drone as a military. And after that, you're talking about everyone who's in Ukraine, the 30 million people there, they donate religiously toward drones to different Ukrainian organizations that buy these drones and supply to the soldiers on the front line. And that's where innovation happened. So now you have a lot of these startups developing these drones that can fly 2,000 kilometers, 3,000 kilometers now. And the amount of ammo they can carry, it started from a couple kilograms, and now they have drones that can carry 250 kilograms worth of stuff. So that shows that the spirit of Ukrainian people, and it's why outside of the army, I think the society is wired differently, where people left their day jobs. They were lawyers, doctors, technicians, and they become full-time volunteers. We would not be successful as organization in Ukraine, Hope for Ukraine, if we would not have a network of these volunteers. These guys, they go to places, sometimes it's a one-way ticket. You don't know if you're going to come back. And I always ask them, what makes you do this? The answer they said, I don't care about being killed. I don't even care about being injured. My biggest fear is to wake up one day and hear the knock on the door of my house saying, hey, I'm a Russian soldier. I'm outside. You're part of Russia now. That's what drives these guys. So they say, no matter what we have to do, we put our civilian life, our careers on pause, our colleges on pause. If we're not fighting on the front line as a soldiers, we are on the back end supplying whatever food, water, clothing, collecting money for FPV drones, but we're in it together. So that's why Russia doesn't know what to do with Ukraine. And right now they're ready to get some sort of peace treaty because they're exhausted. They understand they cannot defeat Ukraine. They can defeat the world by convincing that it's okay to act like that. That's what President Zelensky, I listened to his interview yesterday to Associated Press. That's a very powerful point. He said, Russia never can defeat Ukraine because of the spirit, but they can defeat the world by convincing the world that it's okay to act the way they acted, that it's okay to invade smaller nations, okay to do the crimes against humanity, and you get nothing for it. Nobody going to get punished. Sanctions going to be removed. And that's why it's very important right now. You cannot let that type of behavior say it's okay to act like that. Because if you have one bully like that, and he is not going to get punished, the number of lives is being destroyed, then there's going to be no more moral standards in this world.
Based on what you're seeing from the people and their responses, do you see Russia coming to the table for a peace treaty soon?
They will have to come back because they're running out of money.
Okay.
And that's the only reason why they're coming back. They're running out of money. They're running out of manpower.
Because there was very early on, as you know, there was discussions about a peace treaty very early on. I think it was in Turkey. Mr. Mophead, the English Prime Minister, Boris, seemed to have interfered with that. Can't say for sure, I wasn't in the room, but seems to have interfered with that. And where we are 3 years later is a very lot of dead people on both sides, a very lot of horrendous amount of damage in the Ukraine of its structure. And it looks like the result is outside of all those things, pretty much the same, which is give up this region and Russia will go back to bed.
I think, first of all, the Turkey agreement drafts was number one. I think they wanted for Ukrainian army to be limited to, I think, like 30,000 people, something like that, something insignificant. You cannot have weapons. You cannot do nothing, basically. Eventually, this guy Medvedchuk, who was captured by SBU, and then they was exchanged to Russia. But Russia was planning to put him as a president as a result. So what the Turkey agreement was trying to do to turn Ukraine into Belarus.
Ah,
We're gonna have a peace, but listen, it's gonna be our province. You're gonna have a country, but the country is gonna be the way it used to be during Yanukovych's time.
right.
So it's been a lot of death. It's been a lot of destruction. But I think the sovereignty of Ukraine has been preserved. It might be a smaller territory that we were originally thinking about, but the people who's left, they will never going to be part of Russia.
No.
No matter what kind of political party, because there's too much blood, sweat, and tears has been shed there. So the people have completely Western mindset. It doesn't matter who's going to be with us, right? Whether US decides to be inward-looking country, or we will make alliance with Poland, with Baltic states, whoever still have that pro-democracy, democratic movement, that's who we will align. And the number two is very important. We have a strong army.
Yes.
Ukrainian army can kick ass of anyone on European peninsula and outside. And that's what's going to prevent from bullies in the future. Whoever's going to be a bully in Russia after Putin's death, if we have a strong military, that's the only security we have left. So I think in the end of the day, whatever the peace treaty is going to be signed now is going to be more lasting. It will preserve democracy. It will preserve a Ukraine with a Western outlook, not a republic of Russia.
Tell me, how do you see, what's the vision of the Ukraine people after the war? Because obviously there's rebuilding, but I wonder what the mindset, I wonder how that is.
I think Ukraine's going to be like Israel, to be quite honest, as far as the military goes. Everybody going to serve, men, women. There's talk about starting high school, that people going to learn how to handle in weapons and stuff like that. Because we just surrounded three sides by crazy neighbors. We have Belarus and we have Russia, the rest of the border. We have a little bit of normal neighbors, but it's not like you have a house and you have a crazy neighbor, you can sell the house, move somewhere else. We cannot move anywhere. So I think what's going to happen is Ukraine is going to be one of the most beautiful countries in Europe. As far as economic and innovation, I can definitely see it to be like a Singapore. Because you got a lot of these young people now who's innovating like crazy. Ukraine is one of the most digitized countries in the world. And that's very good, because what's happening is that it's killing the bureaucracy. The last appointments you have to make with a human being and bureaucrat. Back in the day, you had to have some kind of bribes or something involved to get things done. Now everything is in the smartphone.
Right.
So I think Ukraine in 10, 15 years is going to be an amazing country. And what's going to make it amazing is the spirit of the people and a strong military. And I think from strong military, nobody going back to the military we used to have. Because you got to understand one thing. If you look at the presidents, and that was the plan of Putin all along. Talking about Kravchuk, Kuchma, Yushchenko, Yanukovych. All these guys completely sold all the weapons Ukraine had. So Putin would come to them and say, hey, I'm going to send you gas. I don't want your money. Send us leftover 295, the jets. The long-distance jets that they're using against us, some of them were given by prior presidents to Russia instead of to pay for gas that Ukraine were getting. So they completely demilitarized Ukraine.
So Putin was playing the long game on that one.
Of course. See, they took all the outside of the nuclear power, but whatever stockpiles of weapons we had that were left over from Soviet Union, but now it's a completely new game. So Ukraine is going to rebuild their army, new type of army that's going to be used by drones, robots, and everything else. And I think Russia is going to be afraid of attacking us in the future.
So you brought up a couple of points there that I want to touch on. One is, of course, the post-war Ukraine and the power to play there. I would guess that Zelensky is gone. Once the war is over, he'll be judged however he'll be judged on either side of that, but he'll be gone. There'll be a new leadership in place. So that's one piece. And then the other piece I want to touch on here, because again, we're back to this humanitarian aid piece is not long ago, everybody in the world was focused on the war in Ukraine. We were all watching it 24/7, 365. And then October the 7th happened in Israel, and the spotlight moved. And in that moving of that spotlight, it seems like Ukraine got moved into the shadows and the focus goes off. We live in this 24-hour news cycle where the next craziness will grab the attention and important issues will often get left behind. Aside from Trump, is that part of what happened?
So everybody got tired of Ukraine news, and I don't blame, because me personally, I would never think that war is going to last so long.
Mm-hmm.
Us as organization, we were thinking that we were going to be in rebuilding stage in 2023. And we are in 2025 still doing emergency relief.
Yes.
That's how bad the situation is. But for us as NGO on the ground, we have to work extra hard to bring attention to the needs of the people, because there's still a lot of people in the West that care about Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Because they still see that this is injustice that's happening there. And the regular folks, they are suffering big time. So for us as organization and a lot of the other NGOs who still work in there, in order for us to deliver that aid, we just need to be more aggressive in bringing the issue of Ukraine to the forefront, because it's very important to make sure that Ukraine does not disappear from the map of the world.
So where do you see yourself and your organization 10 years from now?
We are hoping to be the most innovative NGO on the ground. That's why we are launching this humanitarian distribution app. It's going to call Hope, and it's going to track everything we deliver on the ground. And it's going to give access to so many people to emergency aid much quicker than it is right now. I want to play a big part in rebuilding the country and make it strong democracy.
So how can people, our viewers, our listeners, be part of that movement towards the next decade?
Just keep Ukraine in your prayers. Keep supporting democracy. Keep supporting the people who suffer in there. Because in the end of the day, what breaks my heart is this regular people whose house has been destroyed, their lives has been completely turned upside down. So keep supporting organizations that are working on the ground in Ukraine, who actually have presence, boots on the ground. That's what's important.
So they can do that obviously through your organization. And again, I want you to reiterate for people, because this is a distinction, humanitarian aid versus military aid. Okay, so we're not talking about sending weapons. We're talking about taking care of the people, because the people don't ask to be in a war. That's governments and bodies. It's not the people. So what would you say to the people of America who have been very generous? We know that. And you talked to me originally when we talked about how much aid you were getting from just in New Jersey, I think is where you are, how much aid you were getting locally and how difficult that is now because of other things. What do you want to say to those people who are now floundering?
You need to understand how precious loaf of bread is. And that's what people in Ukraine are struggling. And that's what breaks my heart, that Ukraine used to be a bread basket of Europe. And now we have people, when we bring them a loaf of bread, they burst in tears. That's how desperate they are. When we bring firewood, we have all the ladies that kissing the logs of firewood. That's how desperate they are. So when you want something good in your personal life, think about those who are so desperate in Ukraine, because they need our help. If we don't bring them that firewood that's paid through donations of good folks on the West, they're gonna freeze to death. Because there are areas in Ukraine that has not have light and power and heat for 2+ years. So when it's dark, everybody going to bed. The only way they can cook and keep their houses warm is through the firewood. So Ukraine, as far as infrastructure, these people, they're thrown back like 60 years, 100 years back. So that's why we as a Western society, we always have to care for those who are less fortunate than us. Not for their sake, but for your own sake, because that's going to bring a reward in your personal life when we help those who've been mistreated by this terrible thing called war. Because in the end of the day, my biggest dream is I wish we could gather all politicians and put them on a big boat and drop them on an island somewhere in the middle of the sea. And I think if politics would be out of this planet, there would be no wars. Because what's causing the suffering of people, simple people in Ukraine, is politics, this war. But in the end of the day, we will overcome, and it's because of the good folks all across the world. So keep supporting Ukraine, keep supporting those who live without light, without power for 2+ years, and they're still standing, they're still smiling. You gotta have guts. Listen, you gotta have guts. We freaking out when we don't have power for 2-3 hours. There are people who live without water and light and heat for 2+ years, and they're still standing. So that's worth supporting, those type of folks who have that strong spirit.
Well, we're going to finish up here, but I want to ask you this question as a sort of close. You immigrated to the U.S. when you were 16. If you could go back in time, you, as in this guy, as you are now at this age, and visit yourself at 15 or 14, at 13, as that young adolescent lad living in the Ukraine, what do you think that boy would think about who you've become and what it is you're doing now?
I'm being blown away, honestly. I would not expect for this to happen because we lived through a very difficult time in Ukraine. I grew up when there was Soviet Union, and it's terrible to live. That's why nobody in Ukraine wants to go back to those days where you told what to wear, what to eat, when to sleep, how to stand. It's terrible, terrible, terrible. That's why everybody is fighting so hard to not go back to those days. So I think US is still the best country in the world, because for me to come here with $300 in my pocket, be able to do what I was able to do, and now be able to help so many people, it's a blessing. And that's why for us as a Western society, wherever you are, US, Canada, Europe, we have to treasure what you have, because if you didn't live in that shithole we used to live in called Soviet Union, we have no idea what it's like. So you need to preserve what you have and fight for democracy, fight for the human rights, fight for the right for people to be different. I think that's the beauty of the United States and Western society. It's okay to be different. These new regimes and autocrats, they want you to be all the same kind. Listen to the same radio, watch the same TV, and that's what Russia has become. When you're talking about Russia in Yeltsin's days, they're trying to be democratic, right? There was free press. Now it's all gone. There's barely you can get a good signal on the internet. Everything is monitored and everything is controlled. So
yes,
for us as a society, we need to preserve democracy. And I hope that America's still going to be a leader of the free world, and we still can help those that less fortunate in Ukraine, Africa, Asia. I always tell everyone that what made America great is generosity.
Beautiful. I agree with that.
What made America great is generosity, whether it's financial, whether it's technology. We should not become scared of this reshaping of the planet, but we should stay firm on our beliefs and fight against this autocratic regimes, and we will prevail, because in the end of the day, light always prevails over darkness.
Beautiful. Yuriy, please tell people where they can find out more about you, how to be a part of Hope for Ukraine, and all the things that they can do to support you.
Yeah, please visit our website, hfu.org, hfu.org. Also find us on social media, Instagram, Facebook, X, at Hope for Ukraine. We do every 2 hours updates on our social media about our work on the ground. So you can basically see things in real time, what we do, who we help, and I think you're going to be inspired.
Well, thank you, Yuriy. It's been a pleasure and honor. I hope you'll stay with us to the end. And for you, dear listener, remember, those who control the meaning for the tribe also control the movement of the tribe. Leaders who are committed to positively shaping the political and business landscape know they've got to tap into what drives human behavior. I am Dov Baron. I show businesses, teams, and leaders how to harness their emotional source code to move their tribe, because unified, actualized meaning is the single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for all individuals and companies. Remember, we need your help in staying relevant, so please go to wherever it is that you tune into the show from and do us a favor, rate, review, and subscribe. And of course, a big thank you to you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about those people who are out of sight and maybe out of mind, who are really, in many ways, fighting for something you might take for granted. We need to raise our hope for Ukraine. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deepest meaning to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, in your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.